While I was away, the president did something that I thought was just one of the most boneheaded things that could be done, and that's this Libby commutation.
Why?
I
What's
just
wrong with
think that is outrageous.
Why?
He should be pardoned. The commutation is basically saying, I validate the prosecution. Look, we now know that the government knew who the leaker was that leaked Valerie Plame's name. It was Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage, and it was an innocent leak. It wasn't one of those things where he was trying to out her. The government knew that before it interviewed Scooter Libby. So we now know that the government pursued Scooter Libby because the prosecutor, the rogue prosecutor, because it wanted someone in the White House or in Dick Cheney's office to blame. And so they set a perjury trap for him. They asked him question after question after question in the hope that he would contradict himself, and that's what he did. The president should not have commuted the sentence. He should not have called it excessive. He should have pardoned him, which wipes out the full prosecution. Now, by calling it excessive, he creates a Pandora's box for other people convicted of perjury whose sentences exceeded 30 months.
Oh, he does everything. It's presidential authority. I'm going to commute this. I'm going to pardon this.
He's only commuted 3 people, and one of them is the vice president's former aide.
But why does that matter if he only commuted 3 or 300?
Because it tells me this. Either he commuted him because he's a friend of Dick Cheney's, which will be an honest thing to do, or he commuted him because he really believes that the sentence was excessive.
Well,
the sentence was not excessive.
Why?
He was exposed to 15 years in jail. Giving somebody 2.5 years out of 15 is not excessive. And the only reason he got the 2.5 is because the Supreme Court threw out sentencing guidelines. If the sentencing guidelines had been in place, he would have gotten 12 of the 15 years. And when the sentencing guidelines were thrown out, do you know what the Attorney General said? We're going to reintroduce the sentencing guidelines and make them tougher because sentences need to be longer, not shorter.
Well, here's the deal. Don't you have to go through the Justice Department in order to pardon somebody?
Theoretically, you're supposed to, but you don't have to. The president could pardon or commute anybody he wants. See, a pardon is an act of mercy. It's saying the whole prosecution was wrong. Clemency is an act of justice. It's saying the prosecution was right, the conviction was right, they just sentenced you to too much jail time. They didn't sentence him to too much jail time. They sentenced him to the low end of what you get for perjury.
I'm the decider.
Well,
I know you're the decider, and I know you have the power under the Constitution, but you should have given him a full and complete pardon. Then the conservatives would be rejoicing, and then you'd be thumbing your nose at this dumb, rogue prosecution, which never should have happened in the first place.
Well, see, do you think that Bill Clinton should have been impeached?
Now, for lying under oath? At the time, I thought he should have been impeached for lying under oath. In hindsight, I think the whole thing was probably based on sex and probably based on the Republicans' hatred of Clinton.
Wasn't Whitewater the original focus?
Yes, Whitewater was the original focus. So just like the original focus
is the leaker, you end up finding that his testimony, they claim that he perjured himself.
Bill Clinton was never prosecuted.
But here's the thing, Judge. Don't you think if the president had in mind to respect the grand jury, judged by your peers, and it looks like he's telling the American people, yeah, you judged this case and I'm throwing it out because you got it wrong?
But the reason the president gave makes no sense. It was not excessive. In fact, it was about the lightest sentence you could possibly get for perjury. If the president really wanted to be honest, he'd say, you know what? I know the guy. He's a good man. He didn't deserve this. I'm going to cut him a break. That would have made more sense than saying 30 months is excessive for perjury. 30 months is light.
I think it's a nice step, and you could always pardon him at the end, keeps him out of prison, and also doesn't tell the jury you wasted all your time. Doesn't pick a fight with the prosecutor.
See, but the prosecutor deserves to have a fight picked with him because the prosecution should never have been given. What?
But you got to view it from a political angle too.
A political angle, he gets more support if he pardons people. The conservatives will rejoice and say, Mr. President, you did the right thing. Libby never should have been in their crosshairs because they knew before they went after Libby who the leaker was. Therefore, they had no business conducting the investigation unless they were targeting Libby, which is what I think they did.
Ray, you're in Arkansas. Ray, you're on Brian and the Judge.
Bill Clinton was impeached and Scooter Libby was indicted. Was that impeachment the equivalent or the near equivalent to an indictment that Scooter Libby?
No.
Okay, it's not.
No, the impeachment, which is a vote by the House to impeach him, is just a charge. It doesn't carry criminal penalties. It's quasi-political. It has nothing to do with the courts. It has nothing to do with breaking the law.
Okay. My comment is this. If Bill Clinton perjured himself and obstructed justice, and Scooter Libby did the same. Does anyone honestly think that Bill Clinton wouldn't have spent some time in jail if he hadn't been president and had occupied a position in the government similar to Scooter Libby's?
That's a great question. I mean, typically you go to jail for obstruction of justice when the obstruction that you caused really sends the government on a wild goose chase, lets a guilty person free, results in an innocent person being prosecuted. But in this case, the so-called obstruction of justice was a farce. He lied to FBI agents, which I would argue you have a right to do because they can lie to you. You should be able to lie to them, and neither of you is under oath. Lying under oath to a grand jury is a very serious charge, except when the reason that the grand jury existed was a farce. Therefore, there should have been no prosecution. Therefore, he should have been pardoned. Pardoning, by the way, wipes out everything. He could keep his license to practice law. It's as if he never had been prosecuted in the first place.
Okay.
When the president went out there and said, if someone is leaking to my administration, I want to know about it, do you think that he had his tongue in his cheek? Like, I know about it. I'm just going to pretend like
Libby wasn't the leaker.
Right. But
and I don't think Libby did anything that Dick Cheney didn't authorize. Dick Cheney wanted Libby to talk to the members of the press the way he did. I mean, they were... remember some of the testimony? It's a little embarrassing for Tim Russert, but just to refresh your recollection about some of the testimony at the trial, Cheney and Libby viewed Russert as malleable, as someone through whose mouth they could get their views. That's why Libby spent so much time on the phone with Russert. What Libby never imagined is that he would have to recount under oath what he said to Russert, and that he would recount it differently than Russert remembered it, and the jury said Russert was right and Libby was wrong.
Dave in New York City. Dave, Brian and the judge.
The fact that they would not let the defense introduce whether she was covert or not, and whether a real crime had been committed in the trial, and then they let Fitzgerald, in his summation, go off on that endlessly.
That's very good. Are you a lawyer? Because in my opinion, that is a basis for a reversal of the conviction. When you let the government talk about something that you won't let the defense defend against, if you follow me, that's an appealable issue.
Just a couple of guys who love talking to you about the news. Brian and the Judge on Fox News Talk.